Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Truly a lot that is breaking this morning. First of all, it is do or die for the congressional stock trading ban, at least if something is going to get passed before the midterm elections. That is looking increasingly unlikely, but we do have details of the Democratic proposal, so we will get into all of that. In addition, as you guys certainly know, Hurricane Ian slammed into Florida yesterday, made landfall as a Category 4 storm. Massive power outages, millions without electricity this morning. It has now been downgraded to a tropical storm, still very dangerous. Huge amounts of flooding, just a lot of devastation and destruction down there. So we will take a look at that. Latest from Russia. We now have numbers about how many Russians, mostly military-age men, are trying to flee the country. This comes as Putin is set to announce the official, in his view, annexation of those territories that had the sham referendums. We also have the official results. Of those referendums. Right. Very credible numbers coming out of there. Seems like it was really free, fair, and above board. We also have the first legal attempt, to take down Biden's student loan debt relief. Questions over whether or not the individual who is suing the administration over this actually has standing to do so. So we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that. And boy, do we have a Biden moment for you. Classic
crazy. Yeah.
Biden moment where he seemingly asked for a congresswoman who has just recently been killed in a car accident. And then the cleanup from Karine Jean-Pierre, if you could call it that, was perhaps even worse than
they refused to admit that he didn't know she was dead. It's wild. We'll go into it.
There's no option but to take the L on this one.
Yeah.
I mean, just take the L, admit, listen, it was a shock. He's still processing it, whatever. But anyway, we'll get into all of that. Also very excited about our guest today, Richard Reeves. We heard him on a podcast with Derek Thompson. Talking about the crisis for men and boys, and in a really, really thoughtful way, and with a sort of positive, affirmative critique of the manosphere and all those sorts of things. So really excited to talk to him as well. All right, let's get to the news. So wanted to start with the potential passage of a congressional stock trading ban. This is obviously something we have been covering here extensively. It is insane that members of Congress who are taking votes that have direct impact, that can move markets directly and have direct impact on industry, are also allowed to buy and sell stocks. Huge potential conflicts of interest here. Of course, we've highlighted issues in a bipartisan basis, whether it's Dan Crenshaw or Nancy Pelosi or anyone else, where this is a major, major problem. So Pelosi, after initially resisting passing any sort of congressional stock trading ban, famously saying people should be allowed to participate in the free market, she backpedaled and she said, all right, we are going to try to get this done. We're going to try to get it done before the midterm elections. And Zoe Lofgren on the Democratic side, I think it's Zoe and not Zoe.
I think.
I don't know. Anyway.
Right.
Congresswoman Lofgren was tasked with coming up with the text of this bill. And now we are really getting down to the wire. Why? Because this is the last week where they're doing anything before the midterm elections. And they also had this government shutdown situation they had to deal with as well. So there's a lot going on. So it really is, they have to pass it this week or it ain't happening, at least not before the midterm elections. Punchbowl has been doing the reporting on this. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. This is from a couple days ago. They say that House Democrats' new bill to ban stock trading will be expansive, applying to members of Congress, their spouses and dependent children, senior aides, federal judges, including the Supreme Court, and senior executive branch officials, according to sources involved in the discussion. So the number of people who would be involved in this, which in my opinion is great, is very wide. So we're talking about both the legislative branch and the executive branch and the judicial branch. So all three branches of government would be involved in this. They say lawmakers, judges, and all other government officials covered by the ban will have to choose between divesting their investment portfolios or putting their assets in a qualified blind trust. Put a pin in that for a minute. We're going to come back to that qualified blind trust in just a moment. I wanted to take the time to actually get into the details of this because I know this has been important to you guys. They also say members of the judicial branch will have to file more detailed financial disclosures. Current and incoming public officials, they'd have to divest or put their investments into that qualified blind trust. The financial disclosure reports, you know, the Stocks Act that we already have in place, they would include more information, especially on spousal assets. They'd be filed electronically across all three branches of government, and the penalties for failing to file disclosure reports would be strengthened. So right now, it's really a slap on the wrist. It's like $200 if you violate the Stocks Act. They would up that penalty to $1,000. Still not that much, but I guess it's an improvement over where things stand today. However, there are a lot of buts and ifs and question marks right now about what is in this bill and also whether it will ultimately pass. Punchbowl, again, in this report says, House leadership does not currently have the votes to pass the bill. Republicans are unanimously opposed. They probably will not get a single Republican vote on this. And they're saying, oh, we weren't involved in the process, whatever. I think you can judge the seriousness with which they take this issue by the fact that
I think they want to hold it for themselves.
Every single one of them wants to vote against it. Okay, so there's that. But you also have a number of rank and file Democrats who are actively opposed. And it looks like Steny Hoyer, who is not just rank and file, but high up in Democratic leadership, also appears to be opposed to this. So lo and behold, when it comes down to it, brass tacks, you've got quite a few, all the Republicans and quite a few Democrats like, yeah, we're not so sure about that. So there's that question of whether they even have the votes in order to get this thing across. We do have the text of the bill, so we do have all the specifics now. Go ahead and put this up on the screen. That's what it looks like.
I want to give people a little preview of what a bill actually looks like.
I mean, I did actually read through a little bit of it, and I got bogged down about page 4. So I'm relying on others' analysis who are better at interpreting or legislative speak. Okay. So here are some of the critiques of what is actually in this bill. Let's start with Walter Schaub. He is an ethics expert. And he is very serious about actually having a real congressional stock trading ban with teeth, and he hates this thing. In particular, the part of it he hates has to do with those blind trusts. What I remember I mentioned before, basically their choices are either to divest everything, that seems like a good option, or to put it in these, quote, qualified blind trusts. However, within the text of the bill, they provide a gigantic loophole where basically Congress gets to say what qualifies as a blind trust. Typically, qualified blind trusts are sort of legislated. The definition of it is set by an Ethics in Government Act of 1978. The text of this bill specifically says that actually that doesn't apply. Congress can decide for themselves what is a qualified blind trust. Obviously, that is a gigantic loophole, and that seems to be the biggest. There are other concerns as well, but that seems to be the sort of biggest concern with regards to this bill and whether it's actually going to have teeth and actually do what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, I mean, as usual, they're the ones who police themselves, and that's why you have to really dig, and I'm really glad that you laid it out exactly this way. On paper, sounds great. You're like, hey, you have to divest or put into a blind trust. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that could work. Well, here's the issue. Some of our most corrupt presidents have actually had blind trusts, which we also know to have been influences of corruption. One of them was actually Lyndon B. Johnson, who fake had a blind trust when he was in there, and history now tells us he was actively managing the trust by calling the guy who was in charge literally while he was president in order to manage his estate. Now, Trump, basically the exact same thing. You can claim all you want that he had no control over his business. As I've said, to me, the most objectionable part of the perfect phone call with Zelensky at the time is when Zelensky was like, and by the way, Mr. President, we were staying in Trump Tower whenever we visited New York. And it was the greatest hotel the world has ever seen. On top of the Kuwaitis and all the Saudis and all those other people who would hold all these magical events at the Trump Hotel, which, by the way, just happened to flow into the blind trust and maybe have made their way back to Trump. They claimed that they took the foreign money and took it separately out. Again, never been verified by actual accounting. The point is that if you even know and it can intimate that about what you have that's in the blind trust, how are you not going to then legislate? Like, sure, it's better you're not actively day trading, I guess, but you could still make policy that if you have an asset that you know is in said trust, then you could make policy in order to benefit that. So I think Walt Schaub put it perfectly, which is that if we all accept, which I think most good people would, that the Trump blind trust was fake and toothless, even if you like Trump, you should admit that all presidents should not be able to do that. Well, then you have to accept that if Congress is going to, quote unquote, verify these trusts themselves, look at the ethics committee too. Bob Menendez is still a senator, okay? The guy is guilty as sin. I don't care, how exactly he got off. At the very basics, there was like a Charlie Rangel. I mean, there's so many of these guys who all survived, quote unquote, ethics inquiries. I mean, the idea that they can effectively police themselves is ludicrous, and that's why we need a law with some actual teeth. So anyway, I think that just shows you why this particular one, if it does even get the votes, which is already objectionable, this is why, because they put in such lack of enforcement and a ability, especially for the people who are the richest members of Congress. This is the best thing that's ever happened to them. They just punt it all over to their investment advisors, but they know at the end of the day what type of assets that they're going to have in there.
Well, and it would be one thing if they were going to abide by like what is laid out in the requirements in that 1978 law of like what qualifies as a qualified blind trust. Because at least that has some stringent checks on it, et cetera. You could look at that and go, okay, well, that's not everything I want, but at least it's something. The fact that they can then just totally circumvent that and set the rules for themselves of what a qualified blind trust is,
right, exactly.
That should make you, more than skeptical. You should just say, basically, this is garbage. So on the one hand, you have not enough, the Republicans are all out. Not enough Democrats probably to pass this thing. And you can also ask yourself how serious Nancy Pelosi really was about getting this done when we know that she was reticent from the beginning that she didn't actually want to do this. And lo and behold, it's been engineered, so it's ultimately probably not going to happen this week. There's still a possibility, but it looks pretty much like a long shot at this point. And then you have, let's go ahead and put this next piece up on the screen. So you've got Steny Hoyer and this other Congressman Murphy, Stephanie Murphy, quietly trying to kill the bill. And they don't really, they're so skeezy. Like, they don't actually even say what they're opposed to. They just say, we need to spend a little more time working on the specifics of the bill, socializing the specifics and then taking another swing at it when we have a bit more time. This week's plate is already full legislatively with the need to fund the government. And also, this Stephanie Murphy, this was just grotesque. She says, as always, vulnerable members are grateful to Mr. Hoyer for standing up and reflecting their concerns and taking a public stance for positions that they share with him privately. Acting like passing a congressional stock trading ban would be bad for candidates in swing districts, when we all know that this is like one of the most popular,
as bipartisan as
totally bipartisan, popular support, that issue that you could possibly get. And she's out here pretending like, oh, we got to protect our frontline members. I mean, it's just completely absurd. And again, they don't even give specifics. I would respect it more if they would give some specific of like, I think it's too far to apply to the dependent children, or I think it's too much to.
Is it?
No, of course it's not. But I would at least respect it if they made some arguments. Right. It's just like, oh, is this going so fast? We have to take our time here. So that's absurd. Let me just put this last piece up on the screen from Unusual Wales with their breakdown of what they consider to be the valid criticisms against the bill. They say, number one, current wording suggests it allows creation of unverified blind trust. That's what we've been talking about. Number two, the ethics committee can waive penalties. Another good issue there. And number three, it can cover anyone related to politicians that is too broad to be realistic. I don't really agree with that one. One thing that I saw, I'm fine with it being, broad in its coverage. To me, that was one of the good things about this bill. One thing I saw is that because it applies to the Supreme Court, this was sort of like a poison pill for Senate Republicans. I don't know. Personally, I feel like it should apply to them as well. And
it should apply to the entire federal judiciary. And we covered that story. We looked at the trades of federal judges who have, in many cases, ruled that where they had direct financial interests. And they were like, oh, I had no idea. I'm like, yeah, you didn't have any idea.
Right, exactly.
You totally had no idea.
There is a clear, demonstrated need for this to apply to the judicial branch as well. So in my mind, the idea that that's a poison pill, well, that says more about the Republicans who would be opposed to that than it does about the provision itself. So to put it all together, there is a bill. There is some small chance it would pass this week, but it looks like the bill has some major problems in terms of what we would actually want it to do. And then it looks like even with those problems, it doesn't even have enough support to get it across the finish line. So that's kind of where things stand.
Yeah, look, would it be better? Yeah. Probably. Is it actually what they're saying and promising? No, absolutely not.
I'm gonna be real. I'm not even sure. I'm not sure it would be better. I guess it depends on the implementation, only because it would really be terrible if you had this like fig leaf of pretend anti-corruption, but the problems still really remain.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. I mean, you're right. So it could be that all 435 members just create blind trusts, you know, within like 5 years, then we're just right back to where we started.
Yeah.
So maybe actually that might be worse, because then they wouldn't have to comply with the Stock Act.
Right. So, and then what does that do? What is that? Well, that's true too. Yeah. And what does that do for public trust if they pass some like fake bullshit thing and then it becomes completely apparent that this was some fake bullshit thing? Yeah. So anyway, it's, in my view, a mixed bag, but I guess it's a moot point anyway, because it probably doesn't look like it's going to happen, but we will certainly keep you posted. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.